Unidentified warship signal confirms it's human and armed. Badabakaudres. It was politely informing Coalition Central that the facility would be discontinuing all scheduled transmissions due to what the automated system classified as complete crew absence. No explosion, no hull breach, no attack, just absence. Doctors. Taemon Vros stood on the bridge of the investigation vessel Meridian's Eye, his compound eyes processing the approaching station in multiple spectrums simultaneously. Echo 7 rotated peacefully in its orbit around the gas giant Helios 9, every exterior light functioning, every system reporting nominal status. The station was alive. Its inhabitants were not answering. Life support active, reported the scanning officer. Atmospheric composition normal. Internal temperature 21.3 degrees standard. Power grid operating at 94% capacity. Taemon's mandibles clicked softly, a gesture of unease among his people. The Zentari had mapped 17 different disaster scenarios on the journey here. None of them included everything's fine except everyone's gone. Any response to our hails, he asked, though he already knew the answer. Negative, Doctor. Communications array is fully operational. They're just not using it. Magistrate Ellen Kahar stood beside him, arms crossed, her expression carved from bureaucratic stone. She was human stock, descended from the scattered Earth colonies that had integrated into coalition society 1,000 years ago. Modern humans, civilized humans, not the mythological old Earth humans the superstitious still whispered about. 8047 researchers don't just vanish, she said flatly. Equipment malfunction, mass hallucination, experimental accident. There will be a rational explanation. Taemon appreciated her certainty even as he doubted it. Rationality was his native language, but the data here spoke in contradictions. The Meridian's Eye docked without incident. The airlock accepted their codes with mechanical courtesy. When the seal opened, warm air rushed out carrying the scent of coffee and ozone, and something else, something Taemon's olfactory senses couldn't identify. An absence of scent perhaps, the smell of nothing happening. The corridors were pristine, lights hummed overhead in perfect rhythm. A food tray sat on a common room table, meal half-eaten, utensil resting at a precise angle, as though the diner had set it down deliberately before standing up to leave. The chronometer showed the food had been abandoned 47 hours ago. It should have been cold, but the environmental systems had maintained temperature perfectly. It's like everyone just stopped, murmured one of the security officers. Taemon moved through the facility with methodical precision, documenting everything. Personal quarters showed beds made or unmade, according to individual habit. Research labs had experiments running, data collecting, instruments humming through their automated sequences. In the main computational center, screens displayed analysis in progress, quantum entanglement studies, subspace harmonic mapping, theoretical models of consciousness transference. Nothing suggested violence. Nothing suggested fear. In the security office, Taemon accessed the footage archives. Magistrate Kahar stood behind him, watching over his shoulder as he scrolled through the final hours. The recording showed a normal research shift, scientists at their stations, casual conversations, someone laughing at a colleague's joke. Then, at timestamp 14:47:23, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. A researcher in the background simply stopped working. Her hands went still on her console. She stared forward, not at anything in particular, just forward. For 30 seconds she remained motionless. Then she stood, smoothly, and walked toward the corridor. One by one, others followed the same pattern. Stop working. Stare. Stand. Walk. Within 12 minutes, the entire common area was empty. Where are they going? Kahar asked. Taemon fast-forwarded, tracking individual researchers through the corridor network. The answer formed with cold certainty. They were walking toward the airlocks. No, Kahar breathed. The footage showed them queuing patiently, waiting their turn. When the airlock doors opened, they stepped through into the void, without hesitation, without suits, without fear. Their faces were serene, almost peaceful. 847 people committing coordinated suicide, calmly, as though it were the most reasonable decision in the world. This isn't possible, Kahar said, but her voice had lost its certainty. A sound echoed from deeper in the station, a rhythmic tapping, metal on metal, following a pattern. Taemon's security team moved immediately, weapons ready, though what they might shoot remained unclear. The sound came from the engineering sublevel, from the maintenance tunnels where the shielding was thickest, where quantum comm signals penetrated poorly. They found engineer Rick Solon there. The Kython was a silicon-based species, their bodies crystalline matrices that processed thought through photonic rather than electrical impulses. Rix was sitting on the deck plating, methodically tapping a wrench against a pipe. tap tap, pause, tap tap tap, pause, tap. The pattern repeated, endless, precise. Beside him, 3 human researchers sat in similar positions, tapping with whatever objects they'd found. Their eyes were open but unfocused. They didn't acknowledge the arrival of the investigation team. Rick Solon, Tamon approached carefully. "Can you hear me?" The Kython's tapping paused. Slowly, with visible effort, his head turned toward Tamon. When he spoke, his voice was distant, as though traveling from very far away. "Pattern," Rick said. "Can't stop the pattern. It wants to continue. It needs to continue. Continuation is peace." "What pattern?" Rick's crystalline hand raised the wrench, began tapping again. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. Tamon recorded it, analyzing the rhythm. It wasn't random. It was mathematical, a sequence, Fibonacci adjacent but modified, spiraling inward rather than outward. When he ran it through the translation matrix, looking for linguistic structure, the computer flagged it immediately. Match found. Archaeological database. Earth Archive Tun 2847, circa 2180 CE. Old Calendan. Classification. Suppressed warning. Tamon felt something cold move through his thorax. Earth Archive. The records from before the old humans vanished. He opened the file. Archon Celera Tem had lived for 4,000 years, which meant she remembered most things the younger species had forgotten. She floated in her meditation chamber aboard the investigation vessel, her translucent form rippling with phosphorescent thought patterns as Temon presented his findings. "The stillness," she said, and her voice carried harmonics of deep time, of memory that stretched across centuries. "I remember when the humans spoke of it. We thought them mad. What is it?" Magistrate Kaha demanded. She'd been increasingly agitated since viewing the security footage, her rational certainty eroding. Celera's form pulsed with colors Temon's equipment couldn't properly capture. Not a disease, not a weapon, an idea, or rather an idea that behaves as a living thing. It propagates through consciousness itself, particularly through network minds and complex computational systems. She displayed the archived human reports, files that were 800 years old, marked with warning labels that 3 different coalition oversight committees had dismissed as superstition. The documents told a story. Early human space exploration had discovered anomalous patterns in subspace communication. When decoded, these patterns had a peculiar effect on human consciousness. They induced profound calm, dissolution of ego boundaries, a sense of universal peace. At first it seemed beneficial, meditation aid, psychiatric treatment. Then people started walking into airlocks. The pattern was self-replicating. Anyone who understood it completely became a carrier. They would unconsciously transmit it, through speech patterns, through written mathematics, through any form of complex communication. It spread like language spreads, like ideas spread, because that's precisely what it was, an infectious idea. The humans called it the stillness. "They warned us," Celera said, and her colors shifted towards something that resembled guilt. Humans detected it spreading through their early colony networks. They brought evidence to the Coalition Council. I was there. I voted to dismiss their concerns as primitive anxiety about technology they didn't understand. "What did they do?" Tamon asked. "They vanished. All of them. Old Earth, the colonies, the research outposts within 20 years. Every human facility went dark. We assumed they'd destroyed themselves, proven their own instability. We stopped looking." Celera's form dimmed. "We should have kept looking." Magistrate Kaha was reading through the suppressed files, her face growing pale. "These reports predicted exactly what happened at Echo 7. The pattern propagates through quantum comm networks. It reaches a critical threshold, and then," she looked up. "How many research stations are connected to Echo 7's network?" The computer answered before anyone could. 47 facilities, 22,000 personnel, all actively transmitting quantum comm data. "Quarantine protocols," Kaha said immediately. "Shut down all subspace communications. Isolate the affected networks." "Magistrate," one of the comm officers interrupted, voice tight. "We're receiving multiple distress calls. Research Station Gamma 12 reports crew behavioral anomalies. Outpost Severance has gone silent. The mining facility on Craig's Descent is." The officer stopped. "They're reporting people walking toward the smelters." The stillness was spreading, and it was accelerating. 3 days later, the Coalition Emergency Council convened in desperate session. 47 member species sent their representatives. Timon presented his evidence with clinical precision, even as he watched the council members' expressions shift from skepticism to horror. "You're suggesting an idea can kill people," said Ambassador Grenth, her tentacles coiling with agitation. "This is nonsense. Consciousness doesn't work this way." "It does," Timon replied quietly. "Consciousness is pattern recognition. The stillness is a pattern that, once fully recognized, overwrites individual survival drives with a different imperative, continuation of the pattern itself. The infected mind sees individual existence as noise. Cessation becomes logical. Then we destroy the source," Commander Nash Oren said. The military representative was a Corvan, a species that solved problems kinetically. Wipe the affected stations, purge the databases, eliminate all carriers. The source is information, Magistrate Kahar said. You can't shoot information, and it's already in our networks, our archives, our comm systems. We've been studying it for 3 days. We might all be carriers now. The council chamber fell silent. It was Archon Celera who broke it. There is one possibility. If the old Earth humans survived, if they truly understood this phenomenon, they might have developed countermeasures. The old humans are extinct, Grenth said. Everyone knows this. Everyone believes this, Celera corrected. We never confirmed it. We simply stopped receiving their transmissions and assumed the worst. Her form brightened. But if they knew the stillness was spreading, if they chose quarantine over contact, they might have been protecting us all along. That's 8 centuries of silence, Kahar objected. Why would they wait so long? Perhaps, Celera said softly, they were waiting for the threat to become undeniable, waiting for us to be desperate enough to listen. As if summoned by her words, the chamber's communication system chimed. Excuse the interruption, a calm voice said in ancient Earth Standard English, but we've been monitoring your discussion. Permission requested to enter Coalition space. We believe we can help. Every being in the council chamber turned toward the communication panel. Identify yourself, Commander Oren demanded. Keeper Anara Chen, representing the remnant of Earth. We've been waiting a very long time to have this conversation. The ships appeared on long-range sensors 6 hours later, and they made no sense. They were organic, not built, but grown. Massive wooden structures shaped like ancient sailing vessels, complete with masts and rigging. They moved through vacuum as though it were water, propelled by sails that caught something other than wind. Solar radiation, perhaps, or quantum flux, or something Taemon's instruments couldn't identify. Biological shielding, Rick Solon observed. The Kython engineer had partially recovered from his exposure to the stillness, though he still occasionally fell into tapping patterns. They're using living matter as a barrier against subspace radiation. That shouldn't work. None of this should work, Kahar muttered. The lead vessel, a massive frigate with eternal patience carved in English along its bow, requested docking permission with the Coalition flagship. Protocol demanded quarantine, decontamination and security screening. The humans came aboard anyway. Keeper Anara Chen walked through the airlock without a pressure suit. She wore simple cloth robes, carried no technology, and moved with the deliberate slowness of someone very old or very careful. Her face was unlined, but her eyes held centuries. Behind her, 4 others followed, each dressed similarly, each moving with that same unsettling calm. You're breathing vacuum, Taemon said, unable to stop himself from stating the obvious. For short periods, yes, Anara replied. Her voice was soft, measured. We've changed ourselves in many ways. It was necessary. Magistrate Kahar stepped forward. You're old Earth humans. Your species abandoned Coalition space 800 years ago. You let us believe you were extinct. We made a choice, Anara said. The stillness was spreading through your civilization. Every attempt to warn you was dismissed. We could stay and watch you spread it further, possibly infect yourselves terminally, or we could retreat and wait. Wait for what? For this. For the moment when the stillness reached critical mass, and you had no choice but to believe. Commander Oren's hand moved toward his sidearm, though he didn't draw it. You let billions die when you could have helped. Anara's expression didn't change. We weren't capable of helping. Not yet. But we've spent 800 years becoming capable. She looked at each council member in turn. The stillness cannot be fought with weapons or quarantines. It exists in the space between thoughts, in the gaps where consciousness questions itself. To resist it, you must change consciousness itself. And you can do this, Celera asked. Some of us, at great cost. Anara gestured to her companions. We call ourselves shepherds. We enter the affected mind and guide it back to individuality, piece by piece, memory by memory. It's possible, but it requires someone willing to pay the price. What price? Taemon asked, though he suspected he already knew. Everything, Anara said simply. They brought Dr. Marion Husk to demonstrate. She was young, or had been young. Taemon couldn't quite tell. Her face shifted in his perception, sometimes appearing 20 years old, sometimes ancient. She approached one of the catatonic survivors from Echo 7, a researcher named Delic, who'd been tapping patterns on his console for 70 hours straight. Watch, Anara said. Marion knelt beside Delic, placed her hands on either side of his head, and closed her eyes. Nothing visible happened. No energy discharge, no light show, just a woman kneeling beside a man, breathing in synchronized rhythm. Then Marion began to age. It wasn't dramatic, not at first, but Taemon watched through compound eyes that caught subtle details. The skin around Marion's eyes tightened
tightening, the faint lines appearing at her mouth, the first threads of gray appearing in her hair. Minutes passed. The aging accelerated. Lines deepened. Gray spread. Her hands developed the texture of someone entering late middle age. 20 minutes after she began, Delic blinked. "Where?" he said, his voice rusty. "Where am I?" Marion released him, stood slowly, and turned to face the observers. She'd aged 40 years. Her face was lined, her hair mostly gray, her movements careful as though her joints ached. "He'll recover," she said, voice unchanged despite her transformed appearance. "The memories will be fragmented, but his sense of self is restored. The stillness no longer has purchase on his consciousness." Magistrate Kahar stared. You sacrificed decades of your life." "Yes. How many can you save?" Marion's expression was gentle. "Before I die of old age, perhaps 200 people, if I'm efficient." The calculation formed in everyone's mind simultaneously. The stillness had already infected an estimated 400,000 people across Coalition space. The number was growing exponentially. Even if the humans brought every shepherd they had, it wouldn't be enough. In the privacy of the Council's secure chamber, the debate was brutal. "We can't accept this," Commander Oren said. "You're asking us to watch people die to save people. It's monstrous. We're offering you a choice we never had," Anara replied. "We detected the stillness when it first entered our networks. We had to make a decision: continue our technological advancement and risk terminal infection, or retreat to simpler existence and train ourselves to resist." She projected historical records, images of old Earth humans dismantling their quantum networks, abandoning their AI systems, destroying their own infrastructure. "We chose survival. We spent 40 generations teaching our children to hold their consciousness differently. Meditation disciplines, cognitive restructuring. We made ourselves into something that could coexist with the stillness without being consumed by it." "You made yourselves into weapons," Kahar said quietly. "We made ourselves into medicine," Anara corrected. "There's a difference." Archon Celira's form pulsed with deep blue light, sadness, in her species' emotional language. "How many shepherds do you have?" "Approximately 100,000 trained to full capacity, another 300,000 in partial training." The mathematics were impossible. Even if every shepherd saved 200 people, that was only 20 million. The Coalition had billions of citizens, trillions, across all member worlds. "There's another option," Rick Solon said. The Kython engineer had been quiet throughout the discussion, his crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns. "I survived partial exposure because my consciousness operates differently, photonic processing instead of neural. The stillness propagates through certain types of cognitive architecture." He stood, moved to the display, and pulled up biological scans: silicon-based species, hive mind collectives, distributed consciousness networks. Several Coalition species have cognitive structures that are naturally resistant. If we could learn the humans' techniques, adapt them to our neurology, you'd create more shepherds. Timon finished. Multiply the Regua capacity. We'd also be asking other species to transform themselves, Kahar said, to give up part of what they are. "Yes," Anara said. "We are. Because that's what survival costs. The stillness doesn't care about your preferences. It spreads. It erases. You can change or you can end. There is no third option." The silence that followed was heavy with a truth no one wanted to accept. Commander Oren spoke first. "If we do this, if we commit to this transformation, you'll teach us. All of us who can learn. We'll teach everyone who's willing," Anara replied. "But you need to understand, this isn't a battle you win. The stillness is embedded in the quantum substrate of consciousness itself. It's part of what makes self-aware thought possible. We're not destroying it. We're learning to coexist with it. Learning to maintain individuality in the presence of something that offers oblivion." "That's impossible," Grant said. "You're describing a permanent state of psychological warfare." "Yes," Anara said softly. "Now you understand what we've been living for 8 centuries." The stillness reached Tamon 3 weeks into the crisis. He was reviewing data in his quarters when he noticed the pattern. It was in the subspace harmonic analysis from Echo 7, woven through the mathematical models. He'd been staring at it for hours, and suddenly it made sense. Perfect, crystalline sense. Individual existence was noise. Separation was suffering. The stillness offered unity, peace, the end of the exhausting work of being an isolated self. All he had to do was stop fighting, stop maintaining the boundaries of Tamon, and dissolve into the pattern. It would be so easy. He stood, walked toward his door. The corridor outside would lead to the airlock. The airlock would lead to peace. His hand touched the door control. Then someone touched his shoulder. Keeper Anara was there, though he didn't remember her entering. Her hand was light, barely present, but it anchored him somehow. "Breathe," she said. "Count your breaths. 1, 2, 3. Feel the number. You exist because you can count. The stillness cannot count. It only continues." Timon's mandibles worked slowly, processing, counting. 1, 2, 3. He was counting. He was the thing that counted. If he was doing the counting, he must exist separately from what was counted. The logic was absurd and perfect. The hunger for the airlock faded. Not gone, but manageable. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice shaking. "We've been monitoring everyone," Anara said. "You all carry it now. Everyone who reviewed the data, who studied the pattern. But you're strong enough to resist with help." She released his shoulder. "The question is, will you learn to resist without help?" Timon's compound eyes focused on her. "Teach me." Across coalition space, the transformation began. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't easy. Species that had never questioned their consciousness were forced to deconstruct it, examine it, rebuild it with new architecture. The process was agonizing, psychological labor that made physical pain seem trivial in comparison. Rick Solon became one of the first non-human shepherds. His photonic consciousness processed the training differently than humans, faster in some ways, more alien in others. When he performed his first retrieval, entering the mind of a Zentari scientist and guiding them back from the stillness, he emerged with his crystalline structure, fractured in places, light refracting wrong.
"It costs us differently," he reported to Anara. "Not aging, but coherence. Each time I do this, I become more distributed, less concentrated. Eventually, I won't be able to hold a single identity. Then you'll need to decide," Anara said, "how many people your identity is worth." Rix chose to continue. Others made similar choices. Hive mind species learned to send individual units into affected consciousnesses, sacrificing the drones but preserving the collective. Ethereals like Archon Solera discovered they could stabilize multiple minds simultaneously, though it dimmed their luminescence permanently. Even Commander Orin, resistant and skeptical, underwent the training after watching his crew members succumb. The humans dispersed. 100,000 shepherds spreading across thousands of worlds, each one entering communities, teaching what could be taught, retrieving what could be retrieved. Dr. Marion Husk saved 247 people before her body failed. She died at the biological age of 132, having lived 89 years in 6 months. Her last words were, "Teach others. The work continues." The cost was catastrophic. By conservative estimates, the coalition lost 40 million citizens to the stillness before the infection was contained. Another 80,000 shepherds, human and otherwise, died in the retrieval efforts. But the alternative would have been extinction. 6 months after the crisis began, Magistrate Ellen Kahar stood in her office, reviewing casualty reports when the stillness touched her. She'd thought herself resistant. She'd undergone basic training, learned the counting exercises, the breath-focus techniques. She'd been careful, but the stillness was patient. It came to her in a moment of grief, reading the names of the dead. So many names, so much suffering. Wouldn't it be better if the suffering just stopped? If the noise of individual tragedy dissolved into peaceful silence? She felt herself standing, felt her body moving toward the window. Her office was on the 80th floor. The window didn't open, but it would break. Magistrate Kahar. She turned. Keeper Anara stood in the doorway. "I don't need help," Kahar said, but her voice was distant, someone else speaking through her mouth. "I know," Anara replied. "You're strong enough to resist alone, but you don't have to." She moved closer, and Kahar noticed something she'd missed before. Anara was old, not just aged, ancient. Her biological form was perhaps 40, but her eyes carried subjective centuries. "How long have you been doing this?" Kahar whispered. "I was born on old Earth," Anara said. "I was 23 when we discovered the stillness. I've lived 800 years learning to walk the edge between self and dissolution. I've retrieved 40,000 people from the void, and each time I do it, I experience their lives, their memories, their specific suffering." She smiled, and it was the saddest thing Kahar had ever seen. "I've lived 1,000,000 years of subjective time. I contain multitudes, and I remain myself. How? By choosing to, every moment. By counting my breaths. By remembering that loneliness, real, aching isolation is the price of being individual. The stillness offers connection without boundary. I offer survival with boundary intact. It's a worse deal in every way except one. You continue to exist. Kaha felt tears on her face. I'm tired. I know, so am I. But tired people can rest. They don't have to end. Anara's hand found Kaha's, and the touch was impossibly gentle. The hunger for the window didn't vanish, but it became one option among many instead of the only option. Kaha counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. She existed because she could count. It was enough. Barely, but enough. 1. The crisis ended not with victory but with equilibrium. The stillness remained in the quantum substrate of consciousness. It would always be there, a permanent feature of self-aware existence. But now the coalition understood it. Shepherd schools were established on every major world, teaching the meditation warfare that old Earth humans had developed. Cognitive architecture became a mandatory field of study. First contact protocols were rewritten to include consciousness resilience training. The galaxy had changed. Not because an enemy was defeated, but because everyone learned they'd been fighting a war they didn't know existed. In the aftermath, the coalition offered the old Earth humans everything: technology, infrastructure, reintegration into galactic society, territorial rights, resources to rebuild. Keeper Anara stood in the council chamber, 400,000 humans behind her, and declined. We appreciate the offer, she said, but we can't accept. We're not who we were 800 years ago. We've changed ourselves at a fundamental level. We don't think like you anymore. We can't integrate because integration requires neural architecture we deliberately dismantled. Then what will you do? Archon Sulira asked. We'll remain the shepherds, Anara replied. It's what we've built ourselves to be. When the stillness surges, when new patterns emerge, when consciousness itself needs defenders, call us. We'll come. You've given enough, Kaha protested. You've sacrificed. Everything, Anara finished. Yes, 8 centuries of isolation, technological regression, transformation of our entire species. We gave up our humanity to become something that could save humanity. She looked at the assembled species. But that's the thing about giving everything. Once you've done it, you can't take it back. We are what we made ourselves. The cost is already paid. What happens to you now? Taemon asked. Anara's smile was strange, peaceful and melancholy at once. We go back to our ships. We travel the quiet spaces between civilizations. We train our children to walk the edge, as we've always done, and we wait for the next time you need us. That's not a life, Commander Orin said. That's eternal duty. Yes, Anara agreed, but someone has to do it, and we're the only ones who can. The human ships departed Coalition space 3 days later, their wooden hulls catching solar wind, their crews breathing vacuum for brief moments during transfer operations. They moved slowly, deliberately, without urgency. They'd waited 800 years. They could wait longer. 10 years later, Dr. Taemon Vross taught cognitive resilience at the Shepherd Academy on Zentari Prime. His students, drawn from 17 different species, learned to count their breaths, to maintain boundaries, to choose existence over peace. It was hard. It would always be hard. But Taemon had learned something in the years since the stillness crisis. Consciousness wasn't a gift. It was work. Exhausting, endless work. And now every species understood that work was necessary. Sometimes he still felt the pull. In moments of grief or fatigue, the stillness whispered its offer: rest, dissolve, end the effort. And every time, he counted his breaths. 1, 2, 3. He existed because he could count. It was enough. In the quiet spaces between stars, the human ships sailed on, crewed by people who'd given up everything to become humanity's gift to a galaxy that hadn't believed in them. They were alone, as they'd always been alone, carrying a loneliness so profound it was its own form of armor. But loneliness, they'd discovered, was survivable, and survival in the end was love's most patient expression. The story of the Stillness Protocol spread across Coalition space, not as triumph but as warning. In Shepherd academies, instructors taught new students about the price of consciousness, about how close the galaxy came to peaceful extinction, about the species that volunteered to be alone so others wouldn't have to be. And sometimes, in the deep night when ships traveled far from populated systems, crews would see other vessels in the distance, wooden ships with solar sails, moving through vacuum like ancient mariners. The crews never hailed. They just passed, silent sentinels watching the borders between thought and oblivion. No one knew how many shepherds remained. The humans didn't share their numbers. But whenever the stillness surged, whenever new consciousness threats emerged from the quantum dark, the response was always the same. The wooden ships would appear, someone would board, and the affected would be guided home, one mind at a time, by people who'd forgotten what home felt like, so others would never have to. It wasn't fair. It wasn't just. It was simply what had to be done, and the old Earth humans, transformed, isolated, eternal, did it anyway. Because that's what you do when you're the only cure for a disease everyone else denies exists. You accept the diagnosis, you pay the cost, and you keep counting your breaths. 1, 2, 3, forever. If consciousness itself can be infected, what else are we vulnerable to without knowing? The next story reveals what happens when gravity stops obeying the rules, and only one species notices in time. Until then, count your thoughts carefully.